For nearly 25 years, these tapes sat in storage. They showed something most Americans had never seen in full: burned corridors inside the Pentagon, firefighters moving through wreckage, pieces of American Airlines Flight 77, military personnel recovering a Marine Corps flag from a damaged section of the building, and emergency crews working inside one of the most important crime scenes in American history. The footage was not classified. It was not a secret government recording. It was something more unusual. It had been filmed by a small civilian crew that happened to be in the right place on the worst possible day. Their camera kept rolling from September 11th through September 13th, 2001. Then much of what they captured remained largely outside public view for decades. Now, 25 years later, that footage is finally being released to a much wider audience. And the story behind the camera may be just as remarkable as the images themselves. The woman at the center of that story was Jude Coke. On the morning of September 11th, she was not chasing breaking news. She was not working for CNN, NBC, ABC, or any major network. She was producing emergency response training videos. In fact, this was one of her first assignments in a new job. By the end of the day, she would be standing near a burning Pentagon with a camera crew. And over the next 3 days, they would gain access few civilian filmmakers ever received. To understand how that happened, we have to go back one day. On September 10th, 2001, Coke arrived on the East Coast with cameraman Billy DeWeese and firefighter Christopher DeWolf. Their mission was routine. They were there to create training material for firefighters and emergency responders. Coke had recently gone through a difficult period professionally. A few months earlier, she had lost a corporate video production job. This new position gave her another chance, and the assignment seemed simple enough. Interview firefighters, record training, material, go home. Then Tuesday morning arrived. On September 11th, Coke and DeWolf went to the Baltimore City Fire Department. Almost immediately, they knew the day had changed. Fire officials were gathered around a television. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 had struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At first, the images were confusing. Was it an accident? A navigation failure? Then, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 slammed into the South Tower. The second impact removed all doubt. The United States was under attack, but there was still another hijacked aircraft in the sky. At approximately 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the western side of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The impact tore through the building and ignited a massive fire. There were 64 people aboard Flight 77, including 5 hijackers. The 59 innocent passengers and crew members were killed. Another 125 people died inside the Pentagon. In total, 184 victims of the Pentagon attack would later be honored at the memorial beside the building. For Coke and her crew, their original assignment was over. They contacted their company in Texas. Then came the decision that changed everything. They would drive toward Washington. Think about what that meant at the time. No one yet knew whether more attacks were coming. No one knew how many hijacked aircraft remained in the air. No one knew whether the Pentagon itself could be hit again. The crew had no guarantee they would even be allowed near the scene. But they started driving anyway, and the camera came on. From inside the vehicle, they filmed the trip toward Arlington. Traffic moved in bursts, then stopped. A road sign showed the Pentagon still several miles away. Smoke was already visible. As they moved closer, they began to smell the fire. At one point, someone inside the vehicle said they could smell it. That detail matters because it captures how quickly this stopped being something they were watching on television. The disaster was becoming physical. The smoke was real. The smell was real. And then the Pentagon came into view. Coke later described the moment as overwhelming. The scale of the damage was impossible to understand from a television screen. Emergency vehicles surrounded the area. Firefighters were moving in. Military personnel and police were everywhere. Smoke poured from the building, and no one could be sure the danger had ended. At first, Coke's crew stayed back. That was normal. The Pentagon was now an active disaster site, a crime scene, and a potential target. Most civilian media were kept at a distance. But Christopher DeWolf gave the group something no normal film crew had: credibility. He was a firefighter. He understood emergency operations. He understood incident command. And he could explain that they were not there to chase sensational footage. Their normal work was training material for responders. That distinction opened a door. According to the 9/11 Legacy Foundation, Coke, DeWeese, and DeWolf were ultimately allowed to document the coordinated emergency response. And over the next 3 days, they received extraordinary access. They filmed outside the Pentagon, then they filmed inside. That is where the story changes. Because most Americans saw the Pentagon attack from far away. They saw smoke rising over Arlington. They saw photographs of the damaged exterior. They saw aerial views of the building. But Coke's camera followed the people walking into the wreckage. Inside, the conditions were brutal. Jet fuel had fed intense fires. Sections of the building were badly damaged. Smoke filled corridors. Debris covered floors. Structural instability remained a danger. Responders were working inside a building that had just been hit by a commercial airliner, and they were doing it while the country still did not know whether another attack might be coming. The Arlington County Fire Department played a central role in the response. Firefighters and rescue crews from across the Washington region joined the operation. They had to suppress the fire, search damaged areas, recover victims, secure dangerous sections, and coordinate with military, federal, and law enforcement agencies. Coke's camera recorded parts of that response up close. The footage shows blackened corridors, search teams moving through damaged sections of the building, firefighters describing what they had seen, emergency workers sorting through debris. In some scenes, responders collect pieces associated with Flight 77. In another, a police chaplain offers a prayer. Then there is one of the most striking images in the collection. Military personnel recover a red Marine Corps flag from a damaged part of the Pentagon. The building around it had been devastated, but the flag remained. That image alone tells you something about why the footage stayed with Coke for so long. These were not simply pictures of destruction. They were records of people responding to it. And that distinction is what makes this archive different. When Americans think of September 11th, the first images are almost always New York. The Twin Towers, the second plane, the collapse, the dust cloud, people running through Manhattan. Those images are permanently burned into the national memory. But at the same time, another crisis was unfolding in Arlington. The Pentagon was burning. People were trapped. Responders were entering damaged corridors. And a small civilian crew was recording what happened after the impact. That is the part of the story that rarely gets as much attention. Not the moment of attack, the hours after it, the rescue work, the uncertainty, the exhaustion, the decisions made by people who had no time to process what the country had just experienced. At one point, Christopher DeWolf reminded Coke and DeWeese of something important. He was a firefighter. Danger was part of his job. They were civilians. They did not have to stay. That was their moment to leave if they wanted to. They stayed, and that decision became the heart of this story. They did not stay because they expected fame. They did not stay because they thought the footage would become historically important. They stayed because it was already clear that what was happening in front of them might never happen again. If nobody recorded it, those moments could vanish. But there was another challenge. How do you film tragedy without exploiting it? Coke has described feeling that responsibility very strongly. This was not a film set. These were not actors. People had died only hours earlier. Families were waiting for news. Firefighters were still working. The crew had to document without turning the scene into spectacle. That restraint matters, because the most powerful footage in the collection is not dramatic, because someone is trying to make it dramatic. It is powerful because the camera simply stays there. A burned hallway, a firefighter speaking quietly, a piece of wreckage, a prayer, a flag being recovered. Then, after 3 days, the filming stopped. But the story of the tapes did not. Coke returned to Texas with the footage. Over the following weeks, some of it was used to create an approximately 1-hour emergency response training program. That material served a practical purpose. It helped responders study what happened. It showed how agencies worked together. It documented lessons from a disaster unlike anything the country had seen before. But most of the archive did not become widely known to the general public. Small portions surfaced over the years. Some clips appeared in documentaries, but the larger collection remained largely out of sight. Then years began to pass. 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, and another problem emerged. The footage existed on aging physical media. Technology kept moving forward. Playback equipment became harder to find. Old tape formats became more fragile. The longer Coke waited, the greater the risk that the archive could be damaged or lost. There was also a human clock ticking. The people in the footage were getting older. Some had already died. Christopher DeWolf, the firefighter who had helped make the original filming possible, died in the line of duty in 2005. For Coke, preserving the tapes gradually became less of a personal project and more of an obligation. By the time the 20th anniversary of 9/11 approached, she began making calls. She contacted people connected to the original production, and what she learned raised the stakes. She appeared to have the only complete surviving collection of the original footage. That changed everything, because now this was no longer simply old video. It was an archive, and if that archive disappeared, some of those moments might disappear with it. Coke began working to preserve the footage properly. She reached out to organizations involved in preserving the history of September 11th. Eventually, that effort led to the 9/11 Legacy Foundation. Together, they developed the Pentagon Response Series. The project is a 6-part documentary series built around footage recorded at the Pentagon between September 11th and September 13th, 2001. The episodes began being released in 2026. The schedule was designed to lead into the 25th anniversary of the attacks, and for the first time, a much larger public audience could see more of what the crew had captured. But there is an important detail here. This footage was not suddenly declassified. It was not hidden by the government for 25 years, and it does not reveal some secret explanation of what happened. That framing would be misleading. The real story is stronger without it. These were civilian recordings made during the emergency response. Some were used for training. Some small pieces had surfaced before, but the larger archive had never been preserved and presented publicly in this way. That is what makes 2026 important. The footage is not changing the history of September 11th. It is expanding the visual record. And it is doing so at a moment when America's relationship with 9/11 is changing. A growing number of adults today were either very young on September 11 or were born afterward. For them, 9/11 is not memory. It is history. They do not remember where they were that morning. They do not remember watching the second plane hit. They do not remember seeing airports shut down. They do not remember the strange silence in American skies. They do not remember the fear that another attack might still be coming. Everything they know comes from records left behind. Photographs, news broadcasts, government reports, survivor testimony, memorials, and footage like this. That is why original recordings matter more as time passes. A statistic can tell you that 125 people died inside the Pentagon. A timeline can tell you that Flight 77 hit at approximately 9:37 a.m. A report can explain how firefighters responded. But video can do something different. It can place you inside a damaged hallway. It can show fatigue on a firefighter's face. It can show the silence around a prayer. It can show people continuing to work while the meaning of the day is still unfolding around them. Today, the Pentagon Memorial honors 184 victims. Each person has an individual memorial unit. The arrangement helps visitors understand whether that person died aboard Flight 77 or inside the Pentagon. The youngest victim was 3-year-old Dana Falkenberg. The oldest was 71-year-old John Yamnicki. Those names and memorials preserve the people who were lost. Coke's footage preserves another part of the story. The people who came after, the firefighters, the military personnel, the police officers, the emergency crews, the people who walked toward a burning building when everyone else was being pushed away from it. And perhaps that is what makes Jude Coke's story so extraordinary. There was nothing in her life on September 10th that suggested she was about to become the keeper of a rare historical record. She was simply a producer starting a new job. She had an assignment, a cameraman, a firefighter working with the crew, and a schedule. Less than 24 hours later, none of that mattered. America had changed. Her assignment had changed. And the meaning of the camera in her hands had changed. She could not stop what had happened. She could not fight the fire. She could not undo the loss. But she could record. So she did. Then she protected what they had recorded. For years, for decades, until the footage could finally be preserved and shared more fully. That may be the real story here. Not that something secret was finally revealed, but that something fragile survived. A set of tapes, a handful of moments, images captured by people who did not know how history would remember that day. They only knew they were standing inside it, and they kept the camera running. 25 years later, those images are reaching a new generation, a generation that never saw the smoke in real time, never heard the first reports, never watched the skies empty. For them, September 11th will always be something inherited, a story passed down, a memory preserved by others, and that raises one final question. When the people who personally remember that morning are gone, what will keep the reality of September 11th alive? The memorials will remain, the names will remain, the photographs will remain, and now more of these tapes will remain too. Footage that spent decades in storage. Footage that nearly became just another box of aging media. Footage recorded by a small crew that never expected to witness history. But when history arrived, they made one decision that mattered. They did not turn the camera off.